People driving over the bridge see a young woman climb over the railing and jump down. She wakes up in the hospital but can't remember anything about herself. A nurse notices terrible scars on her back. Sometime later, in the house of a married couple, Nancy and Abel Johnson, the telephone rings, after which they rush to the hospital and recognize in the stranger their daughter who disappeared 7 years ago. Except that before she disappeared, the girl was blind. She is taken to a house near which there is a large gathering of people. So they have to lead her into the house, covering her head with a blanket. Later, the FBI investigator who handled the case of her disappearance arrives. But the girl assures him that she knew very well where she had been all these years. And she tried to go back to where the other prisoners remained, but she could not find her way. At night, she tries to go online to find Homer, but her computer is offline. Her mother suggests going out for a walk and asks her how her eyesight came back to her. But Prairie can't explain it. Two teenagers see her and take a picture. In the morning, one of them, Steve, gets an earful from his father. The teacher complained about him again. The girl again asks for the internet connection, but her mother, obeying the doctor's orders, refuses. So the girl climbs out the window and goes to an abandoned house where Steve's company gathers. Prairie asks the boys to share the internet, but Steve sets his dog on her. The company is shocked, but they can't argue with the leader. But Prairie bites the dog herself and whispers something to her. The shocked teenagers see the animal begin to lick blood from Prairie's wounds, and she silently gets up and takes her camera and leaves. The next day, Steve beats up a boy from his school and then comes to Prairie's house. He brings her a router and offers her a plea bargain. His father intends to send him to a school for troubled teens. Prairie agrees to help, but he in return must find 5 strong men and bring them to the abandoned house. The two of them drive to the store, where Steve helps Prairie choose modern clothes. Looking into the fitting room, he sees the horrible scars on her back, and he advises her to get a grown-up haircut. Transformed, Prairie arrives at the school and introduces herself as Steve's stepmother. The teacher, Elizabeth Broderick, whom everyone just calls Betty, complains that Steve has become so intolerable that she insists on expelling him. And Prairie suddenly reminds her of her purpose. Teaching excellent students is easy, but that's not the vocation of an educator, is it? And when asked about her name, she says it. She is the OA. At home, Prairie goes online and finds a report on the miraculous resurrection of soccer player Homer Roberts. Remembering the guy, she starts crying in front of the monitor. At this time, Steve calls. He is stunned. Betty seems to have been switched. The girl reminds him that tonight she's expecting 5 people in the abandoned house. Moreover, they must leave the doors of their houses open. In the meantime, Betty meets Steve's father and real mother and accidentally reveals their son's secret. The family goes to the Johnsons' house. Prairie's mother stands up for her daughter, and she records a plea for help and posts it online. The parents take the measures recommended by the doctors. They take away their daughter's gadgets and take the doors off their hinges so that she's always supervised. In the evening, Betty goes online and sees Prairie's appeal. It is also viewed by the teenagers in Steve's company, Buck Vu, Jesse, and Alfonso. At this time, Prairie is sitting alone on the floor of the abandoned house in front of 5 burning candles. And when she decides no one is coming and starts to extinguish the candles, Steve and his buddies enter. But there are only 4 of them. Prairie gets upset, and at that moment footsteps are heard on the stairs. It's Betty coming in. Prairie informs them that she will tell her story first, and then they will understand everything. She was born in Russia in 1987 to a very wealthy family. They lived with her father not far from Moscow. Her mother died in childbirth, and her father raised the girl by himself. Only very rich people lived in their village, and Nina, that was the girl's real name, was friends with their children. Since childhood, Nina was plagued by nightmares, after which the girl's nose would bleed. Most often, she dreamt that she was trapped in an aquarium, she couldn't get out and she couldn't breathe. One day, her father brought her to a winter lake and told her to climb into a hole in the ice. The girl had to become colder than the cold and thus defeat it. And suddenly, the cold was gone and there was no more blood. She started going to school. She was picked up by a special school bus. But one day she suddenly felt very anxious and wanted to get off. At that moment, the car lost control and flew off the bridge. The children found themselves trapped in the car, which was sinking to the bottom. Only Nina guessed that they could get out through the windshield. It was a warning to their parents that their options were not limitless. The tycoon's children died, and so did Nina. She didn't realize where she was or why the darkness was so blinding. And the next moment she was pulled out of the water by the hands of an amazing person. She spoke to the girl. Nina can stay. She could go back, but there she would suffer. Nina wanted to go back, and then the star woman took her eyes so that the girl would not see what awaited her. Her father found Nina on the shore, but she saw nothing. To prevent a repeat of the attempt, her father took Nina to America to put her in a school for the blind, where her aunt visited her on the weekends. But every Sunday her father called her and she played the violin for him. One day she was called to the principal's office and informed of her father's death. Her aunt took her to her house, and the girl ended up in a house with rather promiscuous women. From time to time there were babies in the house and Nina took care of them, although she herself was little. One day a Johnson's couple came to this house. They wanted to take a newborn, but it just so happened that Nancy saw Nina. She was so moved by the girl's fate that they decided to take her into their house. At first everything was fine, but soon the foster parents found out that the girl was walking around at night. They took her to the doctor and he prescribed medication, scaring the parents of the possibility of a mental disorder. So Nancy began the treatment. Prairie was kept on medication for 13 years, but the dreams didn't stop. One day she saw herself in the head of the Statue of Liberty, where she was greeted by her father with 21 burning candles in his hands. Nina realized where they were to meet and ran away. She got to the statue and sat at its foot all day, but her father never came. The girl went to the train station and decided that her father would find her through the music. This was how another man found her. It was morning and the company went home without listening to Prairie's story. Her parents noticed the girl's absence and tried to restrict her movements, but the girl managed to persuade them to give permission for an hour's walk every night. Prairie's overnight listeners decided to check out her story and began scouring the internet looking for reports of the accident in Russia. But Alfonso, who had received an invitation to a free college education, decided not to get involved with this dubious enterprise. Bak Wu tries to talk the guy into coming tonight because Prairie chose them for a reason, and Alfonso, after thinking about it, agrees. Prairie continues the story. She was playing the violin when a man approached her. Dr. Hunter Aloysius Happ was delighted with her playing and guessed that she began to play so well after something happened to her. Happ took her out to lunch, and during the meal he told her that he was studying near-death experiences, or NDEs, which he had become interested in while working as an anesthesiologist. He now works with 4 such people. He gives the girl an instrument to listen to the pounding of the human heart. Prairie listens to the heart sounds of others and becomes so fascinated that she asks Happ to take her into his laboratory. They fly on his plane and arrive at a house in the mountains. Prairie tries to call her parents, but no one answers. That's when Happ offers to take her downstairs to the lab. He leads her into a room, sits her down on the bed, and closes the door behind them. Hearing the sound of the lock, the girl rushes in and realizes she's in a glass cage. A stranger's voice sneers nearby. She probably thinks she's dreaming and will be found soon, but the voice assures her that no one will ever find her. Neither will her neighbors. He is Homer. The next night, Prairie remembers the days and nights she spent in the glass cage. Happ feeds them sublimated food, but the girl can't eat that, and she can't live without the sun either. One night she hears screams. Her neighbor Rachel demanded to know what the doctor had done to Augusta, but Homer persuaded the woman to calm down. Shouting would not do anyone any good. Morning came. Prairie's neighbors began to wash in the creek that ran right through their cells. The girl tried to drink from it and was told not to do so until they had washed up. At this point, Happ comes in and leads her upstairs. After standing in the sun for a while, she thanks the man and then fumbles for a loaf of bread and a knife on the table. And in front of Happ slices the bread and then, finding the refrigerator, pulls out a chicken and makes sandwiches, and then holds them out to him. The doctor is impressed and lets Prairie make sandwiches for everyone, and together they carry them to the other prisoners. Homer asks the girl to find his ring, which he has hidden in an upstairs bathroom cabinet. A year ago, he agreed to participate in an NDE research because his girlfriend announced she was pregnant. He needed to get some money, and Happ offered a good amount. He came to the house himself, but sensing something wasn't right, he hid the jewelry, hoping it would someday be found. If Prairie could steal some bill with an address on it, they could send a call for help. And the ring will convince them that this is not a joke. At this point, gas begins to flow into the neighbor's cell. Homer orders Prairie to shut the vent, and she does so at his behest while the neighbor passes out. Interrupting the story, Prairie runs home. Alfonso accuses Steve of hurting the girl, and a fight breaks out between the guys. In the morning, Betty drives up to school and, sitting in the car, listens to her voicemail. First, the lawyer calls about the inheritance. Then she listens to a short phrase in her brother's voicemail many times. At night, Prairie continues the story. There, in the house, she realized that killing a man is not at all easy. The doctor had made her a housekeeper, thinking that her blindness was the guarantee of his safety. But she could hear Hap taking pills. It turned out that he suffered from insomnia and was forced to take sleeping pills. Prairie hatched a plan. One day, under the noise of a vacuum cleaner, she managed to get some pills out and hid them in a spice box. And she offered to make a soup for Hap from her childhood. It was fragrant borscht, and to tip it off, she asked the doctor to bring some fresh parsley. And while Hap went to get it, she put some sleeping pills into the pot. But the doctor decided to arrange the meal together and set the girl down at the table. After tasting some borscht, she suddenly began to choke. It turned out that the man was allergic to tomatoes. He sent Prairie to the bathroom to get some medicine. But when she went inside, she remembered Homer's request and found the ring, but she accidentally dropped it. Trying to find the ring, she suddenly stumbled over the girl's body in the bathroom. Overcome with terror, Prairie found the ring. Just then, Hap burst into the bathroom and managed to give himself a shot. He sent the girl to clean up the kitchen, and she managed to get some leather out of the general stack. Back downstairs, she hands the found items to Homer through a small hole in the creek bed. The men describe the kidnapper's description and their details and addresses. Now they have to hand it over to Prairie, but the current snatches the package from her hands, and the last hope floats away into the dungeon. Trying to calm down the sobbing girl, Homer makes her jump. And soon she begins to smile, and the guy encourages her. They'll try again. Rachel suddenly confesses that she used to sing in the church choir. Before that, she and her little brother ran away from their abusive father. But they had an accident on the way and died. Except she came back to life and found the voice she never had. And now she dreams of singing for her little brother. And Homer would go with his son to places he hasn't been yet. He asks Rachel to sing for them. The girl turns away and sings. In the morning, Prairie makes coffee for the doctor and then suddenly pushes him down the stairs. And as he falls, she smashes the window with a frying pan and runs into the woods, hearing the cheering cries of the captives behind her. But suddenly she stops on a high cliff and gets hit on the head. The girl wakes up in a surprisingly beautiful place and suddenly realizes that she can see. And then it hits her. She has died for the second time in her life. She sees a small house ahead and walks towards it. Opening a wooden door with a round window, she goes inside and finds herself in a starry space where the old acquaintance of hers, Cartoon, is sitting. She is happy to see the girl and again offers to let her stay. Then the suffering and pain will disappear, but Prairie cannot abandon the prisoners. Cartoon is sympathetic. She cannot get out of there. She offers to go fishing for Prairie and pulls a bird out of the water. It will show her the way to another place, unknown to humans, but to get it you have to pay. Prairie runs to the door and looks out the window to see her father. She cries out, but he can't hear Prairie. Cartoon suggests she go to him and find peace, or take the bird and discover her destiny. But Prairie chooses the path to the captives. Cartoon holds out the bird. It must be swallowed. And then everything she needs will be inside. But all five must try, so Prairie swallows the bird. She regains consciousness on the bed at Hap's house. He apologizes for hitting her, but he was afraid for her life because she was standing on the very edge. And she hides the fact that she has learned to see. The doctor can't let her go, so he gives the girl an injection. After the doctor brings Prairie back downstairs, she shares her experience with Homer. There is a divine mystery inside her, which is expressed by the girl's strange movements. She tells him that she died a second time. And now she knows that in order to escape, she must find out what the doctor is doing to them. But how? After all, the gas erases all memories. Prairie claims that they are all angels and she can now see. It is time to interrupt the story and the people go home. In the morning, Betty goes to see a lawyer and learns that a relative has left her a $50,000 inheritance. The next day, Steve and Jesse go with Betty to the clinic to get her brother's things. The boys are shocked by the collection of CDs of the departed man, and when Steve puts on his ski suit, the woman is amazed at his resemblance to Theo. Meanwhile, Prairie takes a course from an FBI psychologist. He reminds her she's not a prisoner here and can decide for herself what to say and what to do. At night, Prairie continues the story. A week passes before they realize they must try to make sure Homer gets as little gas as possible when Hap comes for him. But the doctor takes Prairie first. He asks questions about the last NDE, a near-death experience, and the girl confesses that she saw her father. Back in the cell, Prairie convinces the prisoners that the doctor is obsessed with his experiments and will never let them go. But Scott refuses to inhale the extra gas. That's when Rachel and Prairie do it. Hap takes Homer away, and Scott watches the unconscious girls. Suddenly, he notices Prairie's open eyes and starts scolding her, and she obediently obeys all his commands. And the man realizes the gas makes people obedient. It took almost a year before Homer managed to stay conscious and get to the doctor's laboratory. He allowed himself to be fitted with a glass helmet, into which water soon began to flow. Here, he gave himself away, but the doctor just gave him an injection, after which the guy couldn't remember anything. And one day, when the doctor came out of the lab, he managed to get to his records. The doctor figured out that Homer could be revived almost indefinitely. And he also recorded the sounds of their NDEs to compile a description of what people call the other world. But at the most interesting point, Homer was forced to interrupt himself. Hap was coming back. The prisoners understood the doctor was looking for proof that death was not the end. Years went by. One day it dawned on Prairie that while in the NDE, Homer must find something alive and swallow it. But it didn't take long for the guy to die conscious until one day he found himself in a vent. He collapsed from the ceiling and ran out into the hole, in the middle of which stood a pentagonal aquarium. Homer snatched an anemone from it and swallowed it. Immediately, he regained consciousness in Hap's laboratory. At night, he told Prairie what had happened, but he does not feel any change in himself. Prairie explains Katoon assured her that they would work it out, and she gave her real name, Away. Immediately, she sees Homer involuntarily perform a strange movement. Cuba. Dr. Hunter goes to a concert of an unusual guitarist and is fascinated by her playing, while Homer and Prairie study the movements that came to them in a near-death experience. After the concert, Hap invites the guitarist to participate in his research, but the girl flatly refuses. The doctor returns home and sees the exercises Homer and Prairie are doing. He demands an explanation, but then Rachel starts screaming and calling for help. It turns out that there is a sheriff standing at the door of the house. Hap turns on loud music and rushes upstairs. The policeman tells him that his wife is very ill and he hopes that the doctor knows about new treatments. Hap promises to inquire into the matter. At night, Homer and Prairie look at each other and press their hands to the glass as if touching each other. And Hap remembers the guitarist and goes after Homer. In the present, the school principal observes a strange company. 4 school children and an elderly teacher, and does not understand what do they have in common. Prairie again explains to the psychologist that the prisoners are no longer in this world. Meanwhile, Alfonso excuses himself from dinner with the benefactors because he notices his drunken mother flirting with a married man and takes her home. And then he discusses with Buck the terrible change in the man. After all, Hap was young too. What if they change too? But his friend abruptly interrupts his musings. Prairie continues the story. Homer wakes up in Hap's plane and is very frightened. He hasn't seen the sun for a very long time. The doctor puzzles the guy. He's going to help him with one thing, but he should not do anything wrong or his friends will die in their cells. Despite the warning, Homer escapes from the hotel room where they arrive. He tries to ask for help, but those around him do not understand him. They speak Spanish. He runs outside and runs into Hap, who orders him back. He has warned the staff about his son's mental illness, so no one will come to help. In the evening, he takes the boy to dinner, but there is no way Homer can settle in until the guitar starts playing. Hap orders the boy to meet the girl and invite her to his room. He complies, but behaves very stiffly. That's when the girl takes the initiative. The doctor listens to the sounds of lovemaking from Homer's room and then turns on the broadcast in the basement. Prairie realizes what's going on. Hap succeeds in making Homer an accomplice in kidnapping the girl. After coming to her senses in the underground prison, Renata blames the guy. But then the gas starts flowing into the cell. This time the doctor takes Scott. And he, fearing death, tells Hap that Prairie has regained her eyesight. The dumbfounded doctor lets Scott die for real and brings his bloody body downstairs. Looking at the deceased, Prairie begins to carry out her movement. She's joined by Homer. All night long, they do the movements that came to them in the near-death experience. Suddenly, the blood begins to return to Scott's body. The wounds disappear and the man begins to breathe. He comes to his senses and reports that Prairie was right. There are 5 movements that do the unimaginable and open a tunnel into another dimension. And he got the 3rd one. Astonished, Hap runs downstairs. Time returns to the present. Prairie teaches her friends these moves and leaves for the dimension where Homer is now. The next night, the captives begin learning the movements that they were given in the NDE. The 4th movement was given by Renata, but the 5th one did not come. The captives came up with symbols for recording the movements, and in order not to lose them, they carved the signs into their bodies. But the angel hunter, the scientist Hap, also recognized these movements and studied them as well. There was only one person with whom he could share his discoveries, his associate Leon, who also studied death. Hap flies to him and he takes him to the morgue to demonstrate his findings. The doctor talks about the 5 movements and Leon suddenly snatches a gun. He won't let anyone overtake him in studying the movements. A fight ensues, in the course of which Hap kills the colleague. He leaves, advising his sister to look into the abandoned morgue. At night, Hap takes Prairie to the lab. He offers her to run away with him, but the girl refuses, and once again she dies in the water helmet. She finds herself in the Star House, but Khatun is nowhere to be found. The next moment she comes to her senses in the lab. Hap has recorded the sounds of her NDE and is very pleased. His theory is confirmed. Back in the cage, Prairie shares her experience with Homer. The girl's heart is broken. But the boy suddenly says that in another dimension they will start a vegetable garden and grow vegetables. She involuntarily supports his game and dreams of how they will live in a better world. Meanwhile, the doctor listens to the sounds of the NDE in his headphones and doesn't hear the sheriff enter his house. The sheriff sees the dungeon on the screen and draws his gun. In the real time, Prairie wakes up from a nightmare. Her father rushes to her room and she asks him about the note she had left before she fled. But the man did not see it. Later, Prairie recounts her dreams to the psychologist while her foster parents wait in the hallway. And then Abel inquires about the note, but Nancy doesn't remember such a thing. In the meantime, Steve gets acquainted to a girl sitting at a desk next to his, Katie. The young people immediately like each other. In the evening, the company gathers again at the house and continues to study the movements, after which Steve rushes home, where his father informs him that the injured boy's mother has seen the fight scene on the internet and is ready to file a report on him. The father had to pay for the treatment, but he's fed up with it all, and Steve has to go to a special school. At this time, Betty shows Prairie a check for the $50,000 and tells her how she plans to spend the money. The woman is concerned about the impending discovery of another world. What if it's dangerous? But Prairie reassures her, most likely the movements just open an already existing path. Driving past Steve's house, Betty witnesses 2 guards pushing the boy into a van. She drives after them, trying to get the school principal on the phone to convince the parents to withdraw their application and return the boy. In the meantime, the Prairie family is having fun at a coffee shop until one of the female visitors takes a picture in front of the landmark, the battered and abused girl. People are amazed at such lack of manners. Alfonso, who works here as a waiter, goes to get water. In the meantime, Steve is ushered into the gas station convenience store, allowing him to choose his own drink. Betty offers him a release plan. He should shout that the men are molesting him. She will back the guy up and demand that he be let go. Out on the street, Steve tries to carry out this plan, but there is no one at the gas station and no one can support Betty. So the woman stands in front of the car and gives the man her check for releasing the guy. Meanwhile, Nancy continues to resent the girl's action, but her main concern is that Prairie is not sharing with them. They don't know where she's been or what they've been doing to her all these years. And that's the scariest part. And then the girl admits that the scars are self-inflicted and that she's an angel. Taking this as a taunt, Nancy punches her in the face. Alfonso, who approaches, suggests that the girl leave and they run away. The boy is grateful for her account of her years in confinement. But why didn't she ever talk about her parents? After all, they saved her too and raised her. Maybe that's the missing piece that can change her life. The company gathers at the house and Steve talks about what his parents did and Betty's sacrifice. Prairie tries to calm him down, but he resents the world and in a fit of anger hurts her with a pencil. Nevertheless, the girl continues to hug him. Steve is horrified. How could she have lived in the basement for so long? And Prairie smiles because she wasn't alone. She lights the candles and proceeds to the final part of her story. Feeling the gun to his head, Hap tries to convince the sheriff not to take him in. He tells him that the people downstairs can do real miracles and they can start with his wife. The sheriff brings his wife to Hap's house. The prisoners are delighted at the sight of the policeman, but soon realize that he's the doctor's accomplice. Hap leads Homer and Prairie into the bedroom to the sick woman. Homer offers not to treat the woman, in which case the sheriff will send the doctor to jail. But Prairie can't refuse to help the suffering woman. And they begin the movements. The power goes out in the house. Suddenly, the woman grabs Prairie by the arm and begins to tell her about drowning as a child. This is when she was handed the fifth movement for the angels. She survived just for that and is ready to show it. At this point, the sheriff runs into the room and hugs his wife, but Hap shoots him in the back. He locks up Homer and Prairie gets a shot that makes her lose consciousness. She regains consciousness in a moving car. The doctor kicks her to the curb. He doesn't need her anymore. Even if she does come back, they won't be there anymore. They will be gone in another dimension. Prairie tries to catch up with him, but can't. And at this point, her story is interrupted by the boys and Prairie's parents. They all came looking for the children. Later, Abel and Nancy try to talk to the other parents, but nobody wants to talk to them. Only Alfonso promises to prove that their daughter's story is true. Prairie finds herself in the thick of the scandal again. The phone is constantly ringing in the house and she is hounded by journalists. The family is forced to hide out in a hotel. As she sees her parents' despair, Prairie tells them about her experience. And in the morning, Nancy gives Abel her note, where the girl apologizes and promises to return after she finds her father. This shocks the man so much that he leaves the room. The woman tries to talk to him, but he cannot forgive her lies. Nancy tries to explain herself. She was afraid he would be hurt by the words about his real father. Also, after all, he wanted to adopt another baby, and she insisted on Nina. She decided that the blind child would always need her. In the meantime, Prairie tries to find the phones of Betty and the others, and she realizes she doesn't know their full details. And Steve and Alfonso are looking for something about the prisoners, and they stumble upon a video of blind Prairie playing in an underpass. At night, Alfonso sneaks into Prairie's house and finds several books in her room, about Russia, about angels, and Homer's Iliad. He tries to splash some water on his face in the bathroom, and looking in the mirror, he sees in the reflection Homer with the same wound on his forehead. On his way out of the house, he confronts the psychologist and explains that all Prairie's stories are lies. Alfonso carries the books to the others, but the teenagers do not react. Sometime later, Prairie returns home, but wearing a police ankle monitor. Betty quits school and comes to get her things. She says goodbye to the principal, who thanks her for her work. At this time, all the teenagers gather in a cafeteria. Suddenly, Prairie, sensing something, runs out of the house. And one of the teenagers sees a man with a gun approaching behind the glass wall. Shots are fired, and the children try to hide under the tables. Betty rushes into the dining room. All five, exchanging glances, suddenly get up and start moving. The cook disarms the distraught shooter, but he manages to make a series of shots over the tables. And then everyone sees Prairie standing behind the glass, and on her chest is a gunshot wound. Later, the girl is taken away in an ambulance. Her friends see her off. Prairie smiles. They made it. All five go after the car for a long time. And then Steve is the only one left. He runs after the ambulance and asks the angel to take him with her. Away finds herself in an unfamiliar room and asks in surprise, "Homer?" And on that intriguing note, the first season about traveling to other dimensions ends. Write in the comments what you think of this series.